For more than 2 decades, Indonesia has been celebrated as one of the greatest economic success stories in the developing world. A country that was nearly destroyed by the Asian financial crisis of 1998 rose to become Southeast Asia's largest economy and the world's 7th largest economy by purchasing power parity. It was the model that many emerging economies wanted to follow. Stable growth, disciplined public finances, manageable debt levels, and a rapidly expanding middle class all seem to point toward a bright future. But what if that miracle is beginning to crack? Why is the Indonesian rupiah sliding toward its weakest level since the post-crisis era? Why are international investors quietly pulling money out of the country? And could the very policies designed to protect Indonesia's economy actually be creating new risks that threaten everything the country has built over the past 20 years? To understand what is happening today, we need to go back to the lessons Indonesia learned from its darkest economic chapter. The memory of 1998 still looms large over the country. During the Asian financial crisis, the rupiah lost roughly 80% of its value against the US dollar. Inflation surged above 60%. The economy contracted by more than 13% in a single year. Social unrest spread across the country and ultimately contributed to the collapse of President Suharto's 3-decade rule. Determined never to repeat that disaster, Indonesia adopted strict fiscal rules in 2003. The government limited annual budget deficits to 3% of GDP and capped public debt at 60% of GDP. These rules became the foundation of Indonesia's reputation for fiscal discipline. Successive governments respected them, and international investors rewarded the country with confidence and capital. For years, the strategy worked remarkably well. Indonesia consistently delivered growth close to 5% annually while maintaining relatively low debt levels. Foreign investment flowed into the country. A growing middle class fueled domestic consumption. Commodity exports generated valuable foreign exchange earnings. The economy appeared resilient and well managed. Then came a new political era. Since taking office, President Prabowo Subianto has launched some of the most ambitious spending programs in Indonesia's modern history. His administration has proposed large-scale housing projects, the creation of tens of thousands of village cooperatives, and most notably, a nationwide free nutritious meals program aimed at serving more than 80 million children, pregnant women, and nursing mothers. Supporters argue that these initiatives will strengthen human capital, reduce inequality, and stimulate long-term growth. Critics are less concerned about the goals themselves than the cost. The free meals program alone represents one of the largest welfare commitments ever undertaken by the Indonesian state. Unfortunately for Jakarta, these spending plans arrived just as the global economic environment became more challenging. Rising geopolitical tensions across the Middle East and disruptions involving Iran pushed global energy prices higher. This created a serious problem for Indonesia. Although Indonesia is rich in natural resources, it still relies heavily on imported oil and fuel products. As energy prices rise, import costs increase. At the same time, the government maintains extensive fuel subsidies to protect consumers from price shocks. Every increase in global oil prices therefore translates directly into higher costs for the state budget. The result is a growing squeeze on public finances. Officially, the government remains committed to maintaining the deficit below the legally mandated 3% threshold. Yet financial markets have become increasingly skeptical about whether this can be achieved without either cutting spending or introducing painful reforms. This skepticism has gradually turned into concern. Throughout 2026, investors began paying less attention to Indonesia's headline growth figures and more attention to the country's underlying vulnerabilities. Although GDP growth remained above 5%, markets started focusing on the budget outlook, external balances, and the sustainability of government spending commitments. The first major warning sign appeared in the foreign exchange market. The rupiah steadily weakened against the US dollar, approaching levels not seen since the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. As confidence declined, foreign investors reduced their exposure to Indonesian assets. Bond yields rose. Capital outflows accelerated. Pressure on the currency intensified. For many investors, the issue is not simply economic growth. Growth can be impressive on paper, while underlying risks accumulate beneath the surface. What matters is whether growth is sustainable. Can Indonesia continue financing ambitious social programs while maintaining fiscal discipline? Can it support the Rupiah without undermining investor confidence? Can it absorb higher energy costs while preserving economic stability? These questions remain unanswered. As pressure on the currency increased, policymakers responded with a series of increasingly controversial measures. The government introduced rules requiring exporters of key commodities to keep a larger share of their foreign currency earnings within Indonesia's financial system. Officials argued that this would help stabilize the rupiah by increasing the supply of foreign exchange available domestically. Soon afterward, Jakarta announced the creation of Danantara Sumber Daya Indonesia, or DSI. Under this new framework, strategic commodities such as coal, palm oil, and selected nickel products would pass through a centralized state-controlled system before reaching global markets. The government presented the initiative as a way to reduce tax avoidance, increase transparency, and ensure that export revenues benefit Indonesia more directly. Markets interpreted the move differently. Many investors saw it as another sign of growing state intervention in the economy. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, perception often matters more than reality in financial markets. Once doubts begin to spread, restoring confidence becomes increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, another challenge continues to grow in the background. Indonesia's external debt has reached approximately $433 billion. At first glance, this number does not appear alarming. The country's debt-to-GDP ratio remains relatively modest compared with many developed economies. However, the composition of that debt matters enormously. Most external obligations must ultimately be serviced in US dollars. That means every decline in the value of the rupiah increases the real burden of repayment. Even if the total debt remains unchanged, a weaker currency forces borrowers to spend more local currency to meet the same dollar-denominated obligations. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. A weaker currency raises debt servicing costs. Higher costs reduce financial flexibility. Reduced flexibility weakens investor confidence. Lower confidence encourages capital outflows. Capital outflows place additional pressure on the currency. The cycle can reinforce itself. To defend the rupiah, Bank Indonesia has been forced to maintain relatively tight monetary conditions. Higher interest rates may help stabilize the currency and attract foreign capital, but they also impose costs on the broader economy. Businesses face higher borrowing costs. Consumers become more cautious, investment slows, economic activity loses momentum. In other words, tools used to protect financial stability can simultaneously weaken economic growth. This is the dilemma facing Indonesia today. The country is not experiencing a crisis. It still possesses enormous strengths. Its population is young and growing. Its domestic market is one of the largest in the world. It controls significant reserves of critical minerals, including nickel, which are increasingly important to the global energy transition. Its public debt remains manageable by international standards. Foreign exchange reserves remain substantial, yet strong fundamentals alone do not guarantee stability. History shows that confidence can disappear much faster than economic fundamentals can recover. What worries many economists is not the possibility of an immediate collapse, but the risk of a gradual erosion of trust. If investors begin to believe that fiscal discipline is weakening, if concerns about policy intervention continue to grow, or if the rupiah remains under sustained pressure, Indonesia could find itself trapped in a cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to reverse. That is why the coming years may prove to be one of the most important periods in Indonesia's modern economic history. The country stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward accelerated development, ambitious social programs, and a more active role for the state in directing economic growth. The other requires preserving the fiscal discipline and market confidence that help transform Indonesia into one of the developing world's most admired success stories. The challenge is finding a balance between these two objectives, because if Indonesia succeeds, it could emerge stronger than ever and solidify its position as a leading economic power of the 21st century. But if policymakers miscalculate, the same ambitions that promised a brighter future could end up exposing vulnerabilities that have been quietly building beneath the surface for years. And that is why what happens in Indonesia over the next few years will be watched not only by its 280 million citizens, but by investors, governments, and economists around the world. Thank you for following this story. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it. For now, this is goodbye. Thank you for staying with Societale Stories.